It always begins in silence. You're lying in bed late at night. The room is quiet, but your mind isn't. One hand holds the phone, the other scrolls. Eyes flicker across faces, bodies, images that feel like comfort but never really are. You tell yourself it's just lust, a natural urge, just one more look, one more fantasy, one more body to imagine. But if you stop, really stop, and tune into yourself, there's something else underneath all that desire. It's not heat, it's not hunger, it's hollowness. You feel it while you're scrolling, while you're fantasizing, not just after, but during. This is the part no one talks about. The moment that hits you when the craving should be satisfying, but instead, it's revealing something deeper, something you don't quite have words for. It's not lust, it's loneliness, it's grief. It's that silent ache that whispers. Something's missing, even as you try to drown it in stimulation. Carl Jung, the great mind of modern psychology, once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their soul." And maybe that's exactly what this cycle is. Not pleasure, no connection, but escape. Escape from boredom, escape from emotional pain, escape from a life that feels disconnected. See, lust, in the way we experience it today, often isn't about desire. It's about numbing. It's a way to distract ourselves from something we'd rather not face, the emptiness that's grown inside us. You say you want her. You say it's about the body, the chemistry, the thrill. But what you want is to feel something real, to be seen, to be held, to be alive in a way that isn't just physical. Lust is just the surface-level name we've given to a much deeper spiritual wound. So instead of turning inward and facing that silence, we chase bodies, we chase images, we chase little sparks of dopamine that light up for a second, only to vanish the moment we've indulged. And then what's left? The same emptiness, the same craving, the same self, untouched. Because lust, in this context, isn't your enemy, it's a messenger. It's a flare fired from the depths of your soul, begging for your attention. And the real issue? Disconnection. Disconnection from your body, from your emotions, from your sense of meaning, from the person you once were, before all this noise. So you grab the nearest substitute, a body, a text, a screen, something that feels like intimacy but isn't, something that pretends to satisfy but only deepens the ache. It's not real closeness. It's not a real desire. It's an illusion, control, escape. Carl Jung called this the shadow. The forgotten parts of us, the wounds that never got love, the feelings we never learned how to process, start to drive the show. And when the shadow is in charge, you don't just act out. You reach for what you were denied, but in the wrong places. You start to confuse lust with love, stimulation with presence, and attention with worth. And it shows up in all kinds of ways. The 2 a.m. porn, the endless texting with people who feel almost close but never real, the way you fixate on someone who once made you feel wanted, just enough to keep you coming back to the memory again and again, not because they're the one, but because, in that brief moment, you felt something like warmth. But what you're doing is running from the loneliness under your skin, from the fact that you never learned how to sit with yourself and be okay. You weren't taught that the ache could be felt and survived. You were taught to numb it, and that's the tragedy. Carl Jung knew this wasn't about morality or judgment. He never said lust was evil. He saw it as something sacred, but also something misunderstood. To him, the question was never, "Why do I want this?" It was, "What is this desire trying to protect me from?" Because behind every craving is a story, a wound, a forgotten piece of you asking to come home. And unless you ask that question, unless you slow down and listen, you'll keep trying to fix a spiritual wound with physical solutions. You'll keep chasing pleasure without understanding why it never makes you whole. You don't need more pleasure. You need more presence. You don't need another person. You need to reconnect with yourself. That part of you that keeps reaching outward, that's the same part that no one ever taught how to look inward. And Carl Jung's most powerful insight wasn't about control. It was about integration. He believed we don't heal by denying desire. We heal by understanding it. bringing all the fragmented parts of our psyche, the anima, the shadow, the unconscious, into conversation with each other. The anima, Carl Jung's term for the inner feminine, especially in men, is a key part of this. When the anima is repressed or unconscious, you can't feel, you can't trust, you can't surrender. So your soul reaches out through projection. That's when you start placing all your softness, your tenderness, your vulnerability onto her. Not because she is all those things, but because she reminds you of the part of yourself you abandoned. So when you ache for her body, her energy, her attention, it's not just about sex. It's about trying to reunite with something lost, a deeper part of your psyche. And that's why lust, in this form, always hurts. Because no matter how close you get, you're still chasing yourself. You can't touch your soul through someone else's skin. And the more disconnected you are from your anima, the more compulsive your desire becomes. You scroll endlessly. You fixate on people you barely know. You replay memories just to feel something. But you don't see a person. You see your unmet needs. You see the warmth you never got, the gentleness you buried, the connection you stopped believing you deserved. And because you never learned to meet those parts of yourself, you try to possess them in someone else. But it never works. Because lust without love, without depth, always collapses under its weight. Nobody can carry the burden of your unlived emotions. No moment of pleasure can substitute for a soul that's starving. So what happens? You start needing more images, more novelty, more stimulation. But it's like drinking salt water. You're running faster in a maze that leads straight back to the emptiness you tried to escape in the first place. Carl Jung believed that the way out wasn't to kill the desire. It was to understand its message. Not, who turns me on? But, what part of myself have I turned off? When you stop treating lust as something to fight, and start seeing it as a signal, you change everything. You stop chasing the high. You start listening to the hunger. You stop asking for relief. You start searching for meaning. And meaning never comes from outside you. It starts right here, with the silence, the ache, the truth. Not the kind of silence that numbs, but the kind that speaks. The kind that says, I miss you. That's the voice inside you, the one you left behind. And it's been waiting, patiently, through every scroll, every click, every craving, for you to finally come home. Let's go deeper. Because here's the thing. This isn't just about one moment of weakness. It's not just about a single night or a bad habit you can't kick. This pattern, this cycle of lust, relief, emptiness, it reshapes how you see the world. Slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. At first it looks harmless. You tell yourself it's normal, just a way to feel good, a temporary escape. But the truth is, it changes you. Not all at once, but in tiny fractures. You start to feel less, not just in relationships, but in everything. Joy feels dulled. Sadness feels like static. You begin mistaking stimulation for connection. You look for highs, not depth. You crave attention, not intimacy. And over time, the idea of real closeness, where someone sees all of you, even the messy parts, starts to feel almost impossible. Carl Jung feared this most of all, not lust itself. But what happens when it becomes untethered from the soul? Because when desire is disconnected from your inner self, it doesn't just distort how you see others, it slowly breaks how you see yourself. At first, it's subtle. You avoid eye contact. You stop talking about how you feel. You lean into fantasies because they're safer than vulnerability. In a fantasy, you're in control. You can't be rejected. You're always desirable, always wanted. But in the real world, intimacy asks more of you. It asks you to stay when things are uncomfortable, to be present when you're insecure, to let someone see your scars without covering them up. And when you've trained yourself to escape, to numb, to scroll, to fantasize, that kind of presence feels unbearable. You don't even realize it's happening. You just stop showing up. Not just in relationships, but in life. You stop creating, stop dreaming, stop taking risks. The same fire that once drove your purpose now gets poured into quick pleasure. You light the match, but the flame doesn't warm you. It burns out fast, leaving nothing behind but more craving. And here's the psychological trap. The more you indulge without awareness, the more powerful the habit becomes. Carl Jung called this a complex, a self-reinforcing loop inside the psyche. Trigger, craving, relief, shame, repeat. Every time you feed it without consciousness, it gets stronger. Not because you're weak, but because you're reinforcing the idea that this is the only way to feel anything at all. But let's be clear. You weren't born addicted to bodies. You were born craving connection. You wanted presence. You wanted to be held, to be known, to be loved without performance. But when life didn't give you those things, you found fantasy. Because in fantasy, you don't have to be real. You don't have to be vulnerable. You don't have to risk pain. That's the cost. You begin to forget how to sit with awkward silence, how to tolerate longing, how to build something slowly with someone real. Instead, you chase instant gratification. But it's not just physical anymore. It becomes emotional, even spiritual. And over time, your capacity to love deeply, patiently, and vulnerably starts to atrophy. Lust teaches you how to run, but love asks you to stay. And the more you run, the more you start to resent yourself. You begin telling yourself stories. I'm broken. I'll never find love. I'm just wired this way. But Carl Jung would gently remind you, it's not brokenness. It's disconnection. Disconnection from the inner feminine, from your anima, from the part of your soul that knows how to feel, how to nurture, how to receive love without having to earn it. You've got fire, but no warmth, desire, but no devotion. Without integration, lust becomes a kind of self-violence, not outwardly, but inwardly. You betray yourself again and again. You promise, never again. Then it happens. Again and again. And with every loop you become a little more scattered, a little more numb. And here's the irony. The more intense the stimulation, the less alive you feel. You've wired your system to crave more content, more faces, more fantasies, but each one leaves you emptier than the last. Carl Jung called this psychic possession. When a complex hijacks your will, when you stop acting and start being acted through, when it's not you chasing lust but your shadow, your forgotten self, your unloved inner child, desperately trying to find someone to hold him, but he only knows one way to ask, craving. That's why the cycle repeats. You fall into relationships, then sabotage them. You want a connection, but you can't sit with discomfort. So you swipe, you scroll, you chase novelty. But no one tells you what's really at stake here. Lust doesn't just keep you from love. It keeps you from becoming you, from your creativity, your focus, your emotional depth, your spiritual clarity. It chips away at your attention span, your motivation, your sense of meaning. And eventually, you start to ask the hardest question of all. Why don't I feel anything anymore? Not shame, not guilt, just nothing. And to Carl Jung, that's the worst consequence. Not pain, but numbness. Because when you're numb, you stop evolving. You stop listening to the part of you that knows something is off. You stop feeling the quiet voice inside that says, this isn't who I came here to be. So, how do you begin again? Not by hating yourself, not by suppressing your desire, but by asking a new question. What is this craving trying to teach me about me? Because the fire of lust, when ignored, becomes addiction. But when faced, it becomes a transformation. The goal isn't to extinguish it. The goal is to understand it. Carl Jung never said, kill the fire. He said, listen to it, because that fire contains truth. It's not about her, not about that video, not about the next message or next app. The thing you're looking for, the map, was never outside of you. It was always your soul. And the first step back? Stay. Not with them, not in fantasy, but with you. Stay in your body. Stay through the ache. Stay present with the craving without feeding it. It will feel impossible at first. You'll itch. You'll want to run. But if you breathe, just a little longer than usual, you'll hear something different. A voice, not the one that shames you, Not the one that tempts you, but the one that remembers you. The part of you left behind, the child who just wanted to be seen, the soul who mistook performance for worth, the man who forgot that the craving was never evil, it was just unmet. And in that moment you won't feel shame, you'll feel grief, you'll feel longing, and finally, you'll feel alive. There's a turning point in this journey, one that doesn't come with a dramatic breakthrough or a single defining decision. It comes with quiet, stillness, that moment when you don't run, when you don't scroll, when you sit through the fire and let it burn, not your body, but your illusion. Because after the craving, after the fantasy dissolves, there's always a pause, a silence. And in that silence is the invitation. Not to fight your desire, but to understand it, to ask it, what are you trying to tell me? Carl Jung believed the energy behind our cravings, lust, obsession, and fantasy was not inherently wrong. It was sacred, misguided perhaps, but meaningful. And if we didn't shame it, if we listened, we might discover that what we've been calling lust was always something else entirely. See, the energy of lust is raw, it's alive, it's fiery. And if you channel it blindly, it consumes. But if you meet it with presence, it becomes fuel, not for escape, but for transformation, for creativity, for connection. That's what Carl Jung meant when he talked about integration, the process of bringing the unconscious into consciousness, not to destroy it, but to reclaim it. Because what you think is lust might be your soul trying to create, to express, to come back into wholeness. But you've been so used to silencing that voice, so used to reaching for the shortcut, that you've forgotten how to sit with it, how to ask, what do I want? Not in a moment of loneliness, but in a moment of truth. You may think you want her body, her voice, her attention, but what you want, what you ache for, is something far deeper. You want to be witnessed, not just touched, but seen. You want someone to look at you and not just see the surface, but your soul. And maybe the real reason these cravings never fulfill you is because you haven't even done that for yourself yet. You've chased pleasure, but have you sat with presence? You've fantasized about love, but have you given yourself the kind of care, the kind of devotion that you're begging from others? This is where Carl Jung's work comes back in like a mirror. He saw lust not as sin, but as a signal, not something to suppress, but something to explore with courage. A message from your unconscious saying, you've abandoned me. And when you look at it that way, everything changes. The late-night urge, the habit you swore you'd quit, the endless attraction to people who never stay. It's not weakness. It's the wounded self trying to be heard. But here's the difficult part. No one else can fix that. Not another partner, not another peak experience, not another affirmation or quick fix. It has to come from you. You have to be the one who stays. Who shows up for your ache? Who meets your shadow not with shame but with understanding? And this doesn't mean you become cold or detached. It doesn't mean you shut down desire. Quite the opposite. It means you refine it. You start to feel the energy, not as something that must be released, but as something that can be transformed. You don't run from it. You welcome it. You ask it, where are you pointing me? And slowly, you begin to see that this energy, this fire, isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to wake you up. Lust says, I want. Presence says, I'm here. Love says, I'll stay. And when you start showing up for yourself in this way, the craving begins to shift. It loses its edge. It no longer controls you. You begin to hold it instead of being held hostage by it. This is how desire becomes devotion. This is how you reclaim the parts of yourself that were never nurtured. You stop needing someone to save you because you've already begun saving yourself. Carl Jung spoke about this as returning to the self, not the ego, but the deeper self. The part of you that exists beyond performance, beyond validation, beyond shame. The part of you that knows who you are, even when no one else does. And when you touch that space, even for a moment, lust softens. It stops being an escape and becomes an offering, a bridge back to your inner world. That's when you start writing again. Not to impress, but to feel. That's when you pick up the paintbrush, or the camera, or the journal, not to distract yourself from your emotions, but to move through them. You sit in nature. You breathe into your chest. You allow your body to feel what it's been avoiding for years. And maybe, for the first time, you hear yourself ask, what do I want right now? Not what will numb me, not what will stimulate me, but what will heal me. This is where your real relationship with lust begins. Not the craving, not the fantasy, but the message underneath it. Because if you keep listening, it will eventually stop screaming. It'll start whispering instead. I want meaning. I want beauty. I want to be alive, not in fantasy, but in truth. And that changes everything. Now you're not trying to get rid of your desire. You're letting it lead you home. Back to your anima, your inner feminine, the part of you that feels deeply, that surrenders to softness, that welcomes emotion instead of fearing it. When you reclaim her, you stop chasing her in others. You stop needing to be rescued. You stop placing your value in someone else's eyes. Because you've already chosen yourself. That's what Carl Jung meant by wholeness. That's what he meant by integration. You don't split yourself into roles anymore. You don't live in a loop of craving and guilt. You become a witness to your experience, a participant in your own life. And then, when someone finally does come along, something radical happens. You don't need to possess them. You don't need them to complete you. You don't need them to carry the weight of all your unmet needs, because you've already started doing that work for yourself. In silence, in stillness, in all the places lust could never take you, but your soul always could. And that, right there, is where healing begins. So now we've reached the edge, the point where craving turns into questioning, where behavior becomes reflection, and where lust finally reveals its true identity. Not a monster, not a curse, but a mirror, a messenger, a sacred signal from within. If any part of this has resonated with you so far, then you already know this was never just about desire. It was never really about her. Not that girl, not that body, not that message you almost sent at 1 a.m. It's about the part of you that still believes connection must be earned. That being wanted is proof that you exist. To be loved, you must first be desired. But desire without presence is hollow. And presence without integration, that's where people get lost. Carl Jung never asked us to repress our lust. He never labeled it a sin or a problem to fix. Instead, he offered us a question. What is this craving trying to show me about myself? It's such a simple question, and yet it opens a door most people spend their whole lives avoiding. Because facing lust consciously forces us to confront something terrifying, our soul. And that soul? It's not neat. It doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it screams in longing. Sometimes it hides in silence. Sometimes it shows up in dreams. Sometimes in obsessions. In that person you can't stop thinking about, even though you barely know them. And that's what makes this journey so sacred. You don't heal lust by numbing it. You don't heal it by shaming yourself into control. You heal it by staying, by sitting in that uncomfortable stillness and listening to what the fire inside you is saying. Because when you do, something remarkable happens. The craving loses its grip, not because it disappears, but because you no longer fear it. You no longer need it to feel alive. You stop being seduced by the shadow because you've begun to reclaim the light. And that's the moment everything shifts. You start to create again, not just content, but meaning. You don't just want to impress anymore. You want to express, to release, to breathe. You start choosing nature over noise, silence over stimulation, depth over distraction. You allow yourself to cry and not apologize for it. You allow yourself to feel without judging it, without fixing it, without rushing through it. And maybe for the first time in years, you ask yourself honestly, what do I want right now? Not what will numb the ache, but what will honor it. That's where the power returns. That's where you stop outsourcing your worth. That's where the compulsive hunger begins to fade, not because you've killed it, but because you've finally fed it what it truly needed. Your presence, the real you, the integration of you. Carl Jung said the goal of life wasn't perfection, it was wholeness. And to become whole, we have to bring the exiled parts of ourselves back home. The shadow, the anima, The child who craved tenderness but learned to survive through performance. The teen who mistook touch for truth. The adult who chased validation instead of vulnerability. They're all part of you, and none of them are broken. They're just waiting for you to stop running. So if you've been using lust to avoid your loneliness, if you've been feeding a habit that only deepens the numbness, if you've started to feel like nothing truly moves you anymore, then maybe it's time. Time to stop seeing your desire as the enemy and start seeing it as the compass it was always meant to be. You don't need shame to heal. You don't need to punish yourself to grow. You just need to begin, right here, by showing up, by staying through the storm instead of escaping it, by choosing not to distract, not to scroll, not to act out, but to breathe, even if it hurts, even if it trembles, because just one breath longer than usual, that's all it takes to change the pattern. And in that breath, that space you've never sat in before, you'll hear something new, not the voice of addiction, not the lie of urgency, but a whisper, soft, familiar, sacred. I miss you. It's the part of you that never left. The voice of your soul is calling you back. You've mistaken lust for longing, but what you were truly missing was you, not her, not sex, not another scroll. You, the you who feels deeply, the you who holds without fear, the you who loves without losing himself. And when you reclaim that, you stop chasing what you already carry. That's what Carl Jung meant when he said we don't kill the shadow, we integrate it. We sit with it. We learn from it. We bring it back into the light. So what does that look like? You create, not because you have to, but because your soul has something to say. You write, not to go viral, but to feel your way through the ache. You speak, not to perform, but to connect. You rest, not because you're lazy, but because you're worthy. And the more you do this, not once, but daily, the more the cravings lose their control. Not because they disappear, but because you've finally given them space to be heard. You learn to hear what's underneath. I want beauty. I want peace. I want to be seen. I want to come home. And that's the greatest gift of this journey. You don't shame yourself anymore. You don't chase love outside of you. You don't outsource intimacy to fantasy. You live it. You become magnetic, not by trying to impress, but by becoming whole. Because now, when someone does come into your life, you're not looking to be rescued. You're not asking them to complete you. You're not handing them the burden of your unloved pieces, because you already did that, in silence, in darkness, in the sacred forgotten place that lust could never reach, but your soul always could. So if this touched something inside you, it's not an accident. It means you're already on the path back. The question is, will you keep going? Will you sit with the fire long enough to hear what it's saying? Will you turn the craving into clarity, the ache into alignment? Because now you know you were never addicted to her. You were addicted to the feeling of being whole, and you always had the map. It was never in her body, never in that video, never in the next app. The map was your soul. So close your eyes, breathe, and say to yourself, I'm coming home.